Back with you now on the news feed late night. Thanks for staying on. Is COVID-19 revealing and possibly widening the inequality gap in basic education? That's the topic with our panel tonight. And remember, we want to hear from you. So send us your comments by tagging us on that hashtag newsfeedpm. And if you want to be part of the conversation live on air, you can send us a WhatsApp with your question or comment to 072 and we'll call you right back. And of course, we want to introduce you now to our panel. Tonight, I'm joined by Basic Education Spokesperson Mhlanga, who's on the line, activist and ANC Youth League member Lindokuhle Xulu, Executive Director of the Independent Schools Association of South Africa, Lebogang, Montjane, and Equal Education's Ntsiki, Dlulane, as well as Solidarity's Anton van der Jon. Now, it has been said quite often here in South Africa that the existence of basic education has been quite a contentious issue and one that has received a lot of pushback for those who are saying we are, of course, in a project of unifying the nation, but not only that, that all sectors of society, including education, should be a part of that program of unifying the nation, of reconstructing the nation, of promoting liberty and equality. But with all this pushback, there still exists, to an extent, a two-system educational system here in the country. Mhlanga, I'm going to start with you. Why is it that this phenomenon persists, that even with all the prevailing pushback that is for inclusive basic education, that a two-system approach is still being taken in the country?
Well, good evening, Thabo. You said it in your introduction that we live in a democracy where there's liberty. So people are at liberty to establish companies that will run education institutions like private schools, just like people open private companies. So in the country, you have the public sector, you have a private sector in business. So the same applies in education as well, where you've got private universities and you've got public universities. It's simply because the Constitution guarantees people's right to choose how to conduct their lives insofar as their livelihoods are concerned. So unless the Constitution changes and prohibits private business from operating, we should exercise our right to choose where to go, that being the freedom of association. In this case, people and parents choosing to take their children to private education. But even with that, when you look at what you call two systems, it's actually incomparable because we've got 25,000 public schools and about 2,000 independent schools.
Yeah. One of those who are against the existence of private schools say it's not much of a choice, Elijah. You're saying, well, people have a right to choose, but it's not much of a choice if the pricing of those institutions places those parents who can't afford far beyond the reach of those facilities. High fees, they actually work as a societal, social selector. It doesn't give them a choice.
Well, the same in where you choose to live. High fees prohibit people from moving from rural areas to the cities where they can buy big houses. So what you see in basic education is actually a mirror of what is happening in society out there. So we can't isolate education from everything else in the country. So even as we engage in this debate, we need to be mindful of the realities of the country, the historical imbalances that have been there and how they continue to exist. I mean, the reality is that we're a country of two worlds, one rich, the other poor, public sector, private sector, public sector for everyone, private sector for those that can afford. So it's not really a matter of affordability, in fact, in terms of parents not having a choice. 80% of our public schools, no fees are paid there. And this is to accommodate those people who are not able to make the means to pay fees. That's why about 8 million of the 12 million kids don't pay fees. So when you choose to be in a private school, you need to understand that you will be paying fees there because the basis of their existence is profit. They need to make money. So if you can't pay fees, then you can't be enrolled there as a child. So the parents need to make a very careful decision around where their children go to learn.
Ntsiki, let me bring you in here in an open letter by one of your members. One of them saying here in Gauteng says, I feel as learners we are not being prioritized here, especially in government. We are told to shut down, but no one else realizes the pressure that's being put on us. School last year was very horrible and stressful. This is because private schools were operating and we couldn't really. Elijah saying, well, that's the society we live in. We live in a society of two worlds. Others have got money and therefore they'll choose to go to a private school. However, 8 out of 12 million learners are able to go to fee-free, no-fee schools, and therefore that's a choice that they would need to make. Ntsiki, please unmute for us so we can hear you. All right, I'm going to come back to you, Ntsiki, in a moment. Lindokuhle, let me get your views on how Elijah has responded and tackled that question.
Well, I am of the view that it is wrong in a number of ways. One, from a racial point of view, we seek to build a non-racial, non-sexist, equal and prosperous society. And we cannot deny that these schools that are called private schools are a law to themselves. Government is hardly involved with their admission policy. They can choose who to admit and who not to admit. And that then works against the objectives of the national democratic revolution that we are in as the African National Congress, because it then says these private schools can go and accept white schools, and it's actually happening. They can go and accept white kids and not prioritize the black kids. So it does not only become the matter of affordability, but it also become a matter of perpetrating racism and also it entrenches the legacy of apartheid that we are trying to dismantle. Here we are trying to build one society. And if you are trying to build one society, you must have a view that everyone must be prepared the same way. Because we are all going to live in one society at the end of the day. So why must we have people who are prepared differently and have other people who are prepared differently? But also, one thing that the spokesperson of education is not taking into consideration is just reducing the matter of education into a possible business opportunity. And our view is that education is not a commodity, it's a public good, is an equalizer into society, it's a tool of socialization where young people and young members of society get to know the culture and the ways and the do and don'ts of society through education. So you can't just reduce it to a matter of business education. That comes with an element of commodification of education. And what commodification of education do is that it makes education inaccessible, and it makes education, it reduces it into something that only has to do with the price tag. We are saying that education must not be an issue of a price tag, but it must be accessed on the basis of affordability. But what becomes more important is that here in Johannesburg, for instance, you have a ward called Ward 21, where you have about 21 schools that are private schools. There's no single public school. All black people there who live there, or even white people who do not afford to take their kids into these sort of private schools, they have to take their kids to Soweto. They have to take their kids to Soshanguve. Their kids have to travel long distances. And that is not the type of society that the ANC is seeking to create. The ANC is of the view that people must live and work and study where they live.
Okay.
So our view is that you cannot create. Please.
Hold that thought, because I've got to bring everybody into this conversation. Ntsiki as well, good evening. I hope you can be able to be audible now. What are your views? I mean, considering that letter from your member and the response that we get from government today as far as the existence of private and public education?
I think it's quite disappointing to be getting that sort of response, especially during this time. We've seen in 2020 when the pandemic started that a lot of learners who were schooling in public schools were being left behind. And this is exactly the same thing that is happening this year. And we should understand exactly what Lindokuhle is saying. Education shouldn't be about privilege. It should be a right and a basic right that each and every learner in South Africa should be getting. And it's quite disappointing that the spokesperson for the DBE is highlighting the inequality that is there within private and public schools. Last year, we saw the Minister of Finance cutting budgets within the public school education system, where we still, in provinces like Limpopo, KZN, Eastern Cape, we still today have pit latrine toilets. Provinces are still struggling in terms of school infrastructure. And this is highlighted throughout the years and something that equal education has been saying. And it's said that learners who are schooling in public schools have to pay the price of not affording into going to school in private schools and pay the price of being left behind, but they'll be writing the same metric paper with these private schools. And the private schools are not operating in their own law. The DBE should be able to hold private schools accountable so that we are creating an equal society so that all learners in South Africa are receiving an equal education. Because it doesn't make sense that public schools are opening on the 15th and private schools are opening on the 1st of February. Yeah. This speaks to the gap of inequality within the education system. And it's quite disappointing to hear the DBE spokesperson speak about learners who go into private schools are the learners that are affording. It's because learners who go into public schools, they're the learners that don't afford. And it is totally not their fault that they're not affording in terms of that. Learners are being taken into private schools because public schools don't have enough resources. Yeah. And the learners that aren't affording, they are going in the schools that there's no adequate sanitation and the education that they're getting doesn't have a standard.
All right, Anton, let me bring you in here. You wrote a solidarity that is to the Minister of Basic Education, warning her to withdraw the directive on independent schools reopening of face in-person learning or otherwise face the consequence. We're hearing today from the ANC Youth League, from Equal Education as well, to saying, private schools are not a law unto themselves. They actually should be falling under the direction of the Department of Basic Education. What's your response?
Thabo, yeah, I've heard from many of the participants stating that education is a basic right of each and every learner. And I cannot agree any more than that. At the end of the day, if you have a government system which fails with the giving of a good and basic education system and doesn't afford the pupils and the citizens of South Africa a good public system, in a democratic society, you get individual private institution which takes up that reins and starts private institutions which can give that basic education to the public and to the citizens of South Africa. So I think there must be a focus on where's the obligation. The problems of the education system in South Africa cannot be laid at the door of the private institutions. You have a government that has a constitutional obligation and who doesn't comply with that constitutional obligation. You will, in every similar situation, you will have private institutions and private role players that takes up that reins and say, enough is enough. Let's start our own thing, and which is open to the public, irrespective of race, and we will start an education system that has good standards and that we can be proud of.
All right, Anton, thank you very much. Stay with us. We'll come back to Lebogang in a moment as well, Director for Independent School Association. Lindokuhle is still with us, and Ntsiki, and as well as Elijah. You can send us your comments as well. Tag us, newsfeed PM, that's the hashtag. Otherwise, send us those WhatsApp messages with your questions and comments, 072 110 5584. I'll say that again, 072 110 5584. The Newsfeed Late Night continues next. Back with you on the Newsfeed Late Night. The debate continues now. Remember, we also want you to hear from you. So send us your comments by tagging us on hashtag NewsfeedPM. If you want to be part of the conversation live on air, WhatsApp us now on the number 072-110-5584. We'll call you right back. And once again, of course, our panel still with us. Basic Education Spokesperson Mhlanga, activist and ANC Youth League member Lindokuhle, Executive Director of the Independent Schools Association of South Africa, Lebogang, Montjane, and Equal Education's Ntsiki, Dlulane, as well as Solidarity's Anton van Bijl. Let's have a look at what you're saying tonight on social media. These are some of the views that are being shared. If government is confident that they are doing a good job in education, why is it not compulsory for all state officials to send their children to state schools? Why do they use private schools if they were forced to send their children to government schools? They might do a better job. After all, what makes state officials better than the people they serve? From Kevin. And Nkosi saying we cannot focus on inequality in schools without focusing on inequalities in the society at large. COVID has only exposed the current status quo. South Africa is very much an unequal society. Our children are not equal from birth. Government needs to invest a lot of money in public schools. Mvula saying, please leave the private schools alone. The government had more than 25 years to fix the education system anyway. It's not too late. IEB is the way to go. Those are views tonight on WhatsApp. In a moment, I'll get Elijah to respond to some of those. But Lebogang, I want to bring you here to the conversation as well. Independent schools viewed as elitists that perpetuate educational inequalities by and large tonight. Others might even go further to say they are discriminating, but also there is class differentiation. What's your take?
Good evening, Thabo, and to the viewers. I think that I want to refashion this discussion. South Africa actually has a progressive educational system in which it actually makes sure that in a society of limited resources, by the way, every society has limited resources, that we're allocating our resources appropriately in order for us to optimize outputs. And as a result also is that I think it is important for us to differentiate. And I think that Elijah said something earlier on, which is important. The differentiation, as Professor Nick Spall has always said in South African education, is between fee and no fee paying schools. It's not between independent and public schools. And the vast majority of ISASA members are charitable organizations who are not for profit to provide an educational system. It is also must be remembered that independent schools existed before public schools. So the oldest school in my membership was started in 1844, St. George's Grammar School in Cape Town. And so these systems have actually, and also talking about liberation, one of the greatest, most of the great liberators of the African National Congress were educated in our types of schools. Also, not all independent schools are high fee. In fact, some of our independent schools charge lower fees than those that are charged in public schools. And also, as the Constitutional Court has recognized, independent schools save the country and the state money. Because of independent schools, government does not have to allocate as much, even though government allocates an extraordinary amount to education. Many of these parents are paying taxes. They're sending their children to independent schools, and that is not a tax-deductible grant. And also, even subsidized independent schools save us as a country a great deal of money. So it must be remembered that sameness does not make equality. And also, I think that something else what Thabo said earlier on. The vast majority, over 90% of our schools do a South African curriculum. That is something that we as South Africans must be proud of. And that is something that for me must be recognized about independence. Let us not divide us. Let us recognize the resources we have, understand, and something that I do battle, I think that we as South Africans battle with. We have limited resources. And independent schools are an important cog in providing education, something that I must commend our government for. We on the African continent have most of our children in schools. We met the Millennium Development Goals. 100% of our children are in schools. For example, in India, 50% of children are in in independent schools.
But
We are less than 5%
Lebogang, is
of
that
the system.
not precisely what the challenge is here? That indeed 100% or even 80% of the children who are in private education do hit those goals, while you have a majority in public schools who don't, yet they are expected to then go and compete in the same society as peers, as equals.
Yes, I think that look, the point is also the other issue. There is no education system in the world that is not hierarchical. And I think also, and I really must say this, there are some excellent public schools in our country, and even excellent no-fee schools that achieve 100% pass rates, high bachelor degree pass rates, and it excites me as a citizen to actually see some of those children doing brilliantly at universities. Yeah. So the idea that ultimately that getting rid of independent schools would resolve the issue of inequality is something that I find quite interesting, because also I'd ask any panelist, even communist countries have hierarchical systems of education.
Yeah.
We provide opportunity, and what we must work for in our country is equal opportunity to education.
If they are,
and you can't get that if you do not have access.
Right on that point, if there are public schools that do get high marks, great bachelor degree qualifications, is that not a case then to be made that those who are wealthier should actually be part of the public education system in order that more students can benefit in the country, not just a few in those fewer schools that are able to reach those kinds of results?
You're correct. And that is why we have a progressive education system. So our high-fee public schools, affluent parents send their children there. Even within ISASA member schools, it doesn't mean because your child is in an independent school, therefore they're in a better school. And we also, I emphasize this even to parents, find the best school for your child. Don't go to the school that you think is prestigious. And also, I know many of our parents who have found that they send their children to independent schools, and some children actually thrive and do better and excel in public schools. So there is this dichotomy, I think, is a false one. And I think that that is something that we can talk about. Affluent parents, and many affluent parents, support public schools. And when you go to no fee paying public schools, sometimes you find out between 80 and 90% of those schools are dependent on school fees paid by parents from various classes.
All right, Elijah, let me bring you back in here to talk about that. You can boast about 8 million no-fee paying schools, but Equal Education is saying, well, those schools that you boast about, some don't even have toilets, some don't have infrastructure. It's good to say 8 million of them can go to the no-fee paying schools, but actually they are not getting the best of education.
Well, that's not the universal reality in South Africa. Yes, there are challenges in the system. We did not say that all our schools have all the facilities, because they were not all built at the same time. In fact, you can go, I was at a school today which was built in 1978. It still has all the facilities in the township of Kwatema, but there's a school that we built a year ago in the Eastern Cape. All the equipment that we put in there have been stolen by the very community where that school was located. You go to Bushbuckridge, we built a beautiful school. Overnight, everything that we had put in there had been stolen, and some of the other structures have been destroyed as well. So that's what you have as a reality in South Africa, that when you try to fix some of the schools, you are taken backwards by the behavior of some of the people who live in the very communities where you are trying to sort out. That's why you are not even able to reach those schools which have old toilets that must also be fixed, because as you move forward, you have been taken backwards. Remember, during the hard lockdown last year, there were over 1,000 schools which were vandalized. We had to spend a lot of money fixing already existing schools. That money could have been used to fix schools which had been on the waiting list, waiting for resources to be brought there. So that's the reality that we are facing. So even as we talk about the challenges that are there, we need to be mindful that as society, we must also take responsibility for the schools that are built in our locality.
As for the resources question, then, if there are parents in the private sector, others of the private schools are sponsored schools, others are sponsored by the church, others are sponsored by various organizations. What is the stumbling block? What is blocking government from engaging? What is hindering government from engaging with the private sector to build one inclusive education system?
No. Remember, we have a right to choose. Someone was saying there, why are public servants not forced to take their children to public schools? A lot of us do. In fact, some of us don't and never had children in private schools because we believe that it's good school, it's a good school. It doesn't matter where it is. If it's a fee-paying school and I can afford, I take the children there. So that's what happened. But also that people have a right to choose. I mean, if Montjane has chosen to operate in the independent schooling sector, it is right to do so. And his other colleagues, they have a right to do so, to operate in that space because they should be allowed to exercise their right to choose how they want to live their life and where they want to conduct business. But we have a responsibility as a department to cater for everyone, all the children, rich and poor, local or foreign, whether they come from rural areas or urban areas. We have a responsibility to make sure that each and every one of them have a right to education and that education takes place in a safe and secure environment against all the challenges that we have. We have established a partnership unit in the department to coordinate all the partnerships that are coming through to us. In fact, if you were to look at the toilets that we have handed over right around the country, they are brought to us by the private sector who feel they have a role to play in making sure that the system right across is fully functional for the benefit of the children wherever they are. So the partnership is there. We are working together, but at the same time, we need to allow people to operate where they want for as long as the Constitution guarantees their right to do so.
Now, the ANC Youth League saying with the current state of education in South Africa can pretty much be attributed to the legacy of the educational policies instituted during apartheid, and it is an indictment on the current leadership that those systems do still exist, where you have, and if you will admit, the majority of the schools that fall within the Department of Basic Education are in the townships where a majority of the people that reside there are black. So that particular racial group continuing to be provided a certain type of education, while the more affluent who have the choice, as you're saying, to choose where they go, get a better education.
No, that's an extremely dangerous statement that you're making. All you need to do, in fact, I'll challenge you to do this. We can come back again and have this debate. Go to the school performance report of the matric results of the past 5 years. In fact, you can take 1 year or any other year, and you can both go through that report. You will see where the best performance comes from. It comes from rural areas. Even here, you've got a school, Mhlanga, here in Tsepison, in the West End. It consistently performs at 100%. And the schools in the cities can't even achieve at that level. Yet, they write the same paper. The learners are exposed to the same curriculum every year. You go to Limpopo. Every year, when we check, the top performing learners of the 27 that the minister always invites to the event of the matric announcement, they come from Limpopo. That's the majority. Or they come from Mpumalanga, KZN, rural areas. I'm not talking about townships. Forget the townships. I'm talking about rural areas. That shows that the gap between the urban areas, the suburban schools, and the rural schools is closing when it comes to actual learning outcomes. I'm not talking about the high-rise schools and the flat structure of the school. No, I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about tennis courts or soccer fields that have artificial grass. I'm talking about what happens inside the classroom. So in that regard, the gap is closing. So we need to scrutinize the data that the department has made publicly available before we can make generalizations that are likely to mislead the country.
Right. Elijah, stay with us. We'll come back. I'll get Lindokuhle to respond to that. The gap is closing when it comes to outcomes. The performing schools are actually coming from rural parts of South Africa. And when we come back, we take comments and questions from our viewers. Remember, you can send us your comments by tagging us on the hashtag NewsFeedPM. And if you want to be part of the conversation live, send us your WhatsApps now with your questions and comments. 072 110 5584. We'll call you right back. The Newsfeed Late Night continues next. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're with the Newsfeed Late Night and our continued debate today looking at the education system in the country, the nature, the purpose, and the existence of private schools and public schools, and what do they serve as a purpose in society today. Before we went to the break, Elijah saying that as far as the gap of outcomes is concerned, that gap is closing. In fact, you find that much of the performance in our final results comes from rural areas. Lindokuhle, I want you to respond to that. What's your view?
Yeah. Firstly, I think we must be able to guide Elijah there. I think he's participating in a debate that he might not have a full understanding of, in my view. I think what Elijah must tell us is, are there enough PPEs for the schools to open? Is the sanitation proper now at schools? Have they provided mobile tanks for kids to have water as well facing COVID-19? Have they provided mobile classrooms? Not to come here and defend the system that is not defendable. I must also state that throughout the debate, I've been very much disappointed by the views of Mr. Lebogang. He seems to have forgotten that the current agenda of the day in South Africa is to de-racialize society. You can't compare us to other countries that did not go through the experience that we had for more than 400 years as a South African society, right? Then to Anton, we understand, Anton, you have these rights, but we are of the view that we are not in the equal footing. We must all be equal first. You must be at the equal footing. Then you can't be able to then say you must have private schools or public schools. But what is happening now is that the schools that to brag about that they must be independent, they must be allowed to operate, are actual stolen property because majority of them, you guys did not build them. They were built by the apartheid state. What happened is that when we then inherited this country, we're made to inherit debt. The ANC was made to inherit international debt. We're made to pay that debt. But assets like schools, you guys, you then took them and made them private companies. So as a matter of historical social redress, we need to hand over these schools to government because in order to address the issue of the lack of infrastructure, because what you have now is not your schools, it's our schools. They were built with government money. We are still paying those debts that you took building those schools. So you cannot be benefiting. If you want to build public schools, if you want to build private schools, go find money and build new private schools. But also to speak about Constitution as the Bijl, as this unchangeable document is wrong. You can't say because things are in the Constitution, therefore they must remain as they are. The Constitution must reflect the aspirations of the people. At the current moment, when it comes to this matter, it does not reflect the aspirations of the people. So you need, as the governing party, to correct that through laws in Parliament. We are not saying that things must be done illegally, but I must also state that our problem is that these schools are a perpetration of the apartheid ideas of separate development. Education itself is a developmental tool. And if you have two separate education in the country, you then have what you call apartheid. And what is apartheid is separate development. So that is the first problem that you have. But also, today in South Africa, these schools government do not know what is happening there. Government cannot control what is taught there, and we cannot have that situation. That's why you have a child, a white child, who was born in 2000 when apartheid ended in 1994. A child who was born in 2000 is a racist. Why to have that is because in these schools, they have been turned into a hub of regeneration of racist white supremacist ideas. And that's why, therefore, government needs to nationalize these schools, make it one educational system so that government can be responsible of what is taught there. At the moment, these schools are actually a tool of divisive behavior in society. And we are not going to stop having young racists and young fervoot in this society if you still have this school.
Let's get Anton to respond to what you're raising there before we run out of time. One of the most controversial issues, Anton, that comes whenever this issue of private and public schools is raised is the aspect that Lindokuhle is saying, the transfer of ownership of schools and property to local communities which are predominantly white communities. According to the Samuel in Collins 1992, page 52 and 54, the wholesale selling of national resources is a huge travesty of justice. That's what they say.
Well, Thabo, at the end of the day, as I said previously, there's a constitutional imperative on the government to make sure that there's a good basic education system. At the end of the day, to ask or to argue that there's not a good basic education system, public education system based on apartheid is a fallacy. At the end of the day, we sit with the realities of the day. We have a government which has been governing for the past few decades. And at the end of the day, the question must be asked, how many schools have the ANC government built up to date? A few schools.
That's a question that must be asked. How many schools have you stolen? How many schools have you taken illegally? Because these schools that you are bragging about, you did not build them privately. They were built by the state. They were supposed to be transformed, to be transferred to the ownership of the new government, right? What you did, you took them and you privatized them. When are you returning them back? That is what we must be debating. Then you can go to your farms and build new schools. These ones that were built by the state, we are still paying for them. You took that building.
Hold on, Lindokuhle, right? Hold on, right? Anton, just finish your thought there.
Yeah, we can go on with political rhetoric at the end of the day.
But the rhetoric is what we're saying. You can't say that is the rhetoric, Anton. The rhetoric is what we're saying. The rhetoric is the idea that we have done nothing in government as the ANC, when actually we are correcting what you have done wrong for 100 years.
We're going to run out of time, Lindokuhle, before Anton gets to
we're not going to allow Anton to parade and mislead society. We must correct that.
You've made the point. You've made the point. Anton, you want to respond?
Well, at the end of the day, as I've stated, we have a good public and private institution education system. We don't see any reason why the fault of the government must be laid at the door of private institutions. We have a government which has a constitutional imperative.
It's not the fault of government. It's the leakers of apartheid. It's the leakers of apartheid that we're addressing. So don't call it a fault. You see, the private schools, so don't call it a fault of apartheid, of government. It's the leakers of apartheid that we're addressing.
You have argued that 6, 7, 8 times. You can argue it again if you want to, please. Argue it again.
Can I come in?
All right, Ntsiki, I'll give you 30 seconds. Go for it.
Amazing. I think I'm quite disappointed by the DBE and Comrade Lebogang. I think it worries me when we have such an ignorant government during this time, a government that is lacking a political will more than everything like that. We are sitting here, we have learners 27 after democracy that have to demand their education. I worry about this concept of constitution. Who is this constitution serving? Because we have learners that the DBE has failed to implement a law that called minimum norms and standards for school infrastructure. This is a law that specifically speaks what makes a school, be it about sanitation, be it about fencing and infrastructure of the school. Right. And the curriculum that Comrade Lebogang is talking about, these learners are learning under what conditions? Right. We can never run away from the fact that there's still so much inequality within the education.
Unfortunately, I've got to stop you there because I am completely out of time. I do apologize. We're going to have to leave it there. We'll pick up this debate again at a later stage. Anton, Lebogang, appreciate your time. Lindokuhle, appreciate your time. Ntsiki, as well as Mhlanga for the Department of Basic Education. We do appreciate your time.